Welcome everyone. I'm Mary-Margaret Zindren, Executive Vice President and Executive Director of the American Institute of Architects, Minnesota, the host of this webinar, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. We want to thank you for joining the Future of Design series, and this session, which is titled Rework Workplace, Office Space Design and Operation in the Context of COVID-19. This is the first of a series of sessions that we've organized focused on the future of design of the built environment. Upcoming sessions are being held over the course of the next 2 weeks and will focus on arts and cultural spaces, healthcare facilities, higher education spaces, and research laboratories. On that Future of Design series webpage on our website, you'll also find a link to a webinar that AIA Minnesota is co-sponsoring, focused on interpretation of the state's guidance for restaurants and bars and related liability issues. That session is going to be held at 10:30 today, so immediately following this webinar, and is hosted by Taft Law. You can register for any of those sessions on the AIA Minnesota website. One more quick note before we introduce each of our speakers. We are very grateful for the partnership of several professional associations who made this session possible. Many thanks to BOMA, Greater Minneapolis, BOMA, Greater St. Paul, the Duluth Area Chamber of Commerce, the Minneapolis Downtown Council, the Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce, the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce, and the Twin West Chamber of Commerce. A couple of quick housekeeping items. We are recording this session and we will post it to our website soon after its conclusion. Also, we encourage you to type in your questions as you have them. My colleagues Ann Mayhew and Sherry Hansen will be keeping the technology side of things going and helping with the Q&A section of the webinar. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. We've gathered an amazing group of speakers today to share their perspectives. They are from the architecture community and the business community. Each of them has been working on these issues in their own spheres with both external and internal clients to identify and address near-term risks and to bring forward concerns and questions to keep in mind for the longer term. I think you can now see all the folks that you're going to be hearing from today. Our sincere thanks to each of you for making time to do this. You're going to be seeing these folks again in the Q&A portion. So for now, we're going to switch over to slides to introduce each of them to you. So first we have Lisa Poole, Principal and the Global Workplace Strategy Leader for Perkins+Will. Dagmar Larson, AIA, an architect and principal at MSR. And Rick Carter, FAIA, the CEO of LHB. And from our business community, we are joined by Christine Ackerman, Vice President of Human Resources at Sleep Number Corporation, and Steve Herron, Principal at Zeller. Lisa Poole from Perkins+Will is going to kick us off. So Lisa, please share your screen now and go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mary-Margaret. Yeah, Perkins+Will has developed a roadmap for our clients and for ourselves, which is a research-driven roadmap that really draws from public health guidance from the CDC, the World Health Organization.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt for a moment because I can't see your screen, and I think that's true for all of us. So if you could try again to share your screen.
Is that better? Did I hit the wrong button? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, you can see your main title page now. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, we've created this research-driven roadmap, and we've actually, in the past couple of months, we've shared this with over 100 clients, which has been a really terrific experience because all along the way, we've been sharing best practices and learning from each other, as many of us are during this pandemic. As I said, this is grounded in public health guidance from the CDC, the World Health Organization, OSHA, as well as local, state, and federal government agencies. This roadmap is focused on workplace, but we've also developed one for higher education, K-12 schools, and healthcare ambulatory care spaces. What I'm going to share with you here today is our abbreviated version to give you an overview of what's included. The full roadmap, which gets updated as new guidance becomes available, can be found on our website. So we start by understanding and establishing what the phases of the pandemic are, as documented by the World Health Organization. And then also looking at, from a risk assessment standpoint, what is our response to those phases? So for many of us, we are currently in this response phase of the pandemic phase, where many of us are still working from home 100% and following the restrictions from the government. Of course, as we see some of that starting to loosen, some of us are starting to move back into the workplace. This roadmap is focused on the transition phase, which is really about interim workplace options that are established to address reasonable protection in the workplace and individual level of comfort around returning. We also include some information and are working on further documentation for future prep is really about that ongoing workplace policies and protocols that will be adjusted and integrated into new ways of working in the future in this interpandemic phase. The framework for this roadmap is comprehensive, and it includes 3 categories with a different response for each phase. The first category is about work location, and this is really about who is working remotely and who is working in the office. And we really anticipate a phased return over this transition period of more people working in the office and fewer people working remote in terms of their given workday and their work week. We do anticipate, as many do, that this future new normal will include an increased number of remote work and in-office work. The operations category is about how we will work when we're in the office, and the roadmap includes guidance around commuting and building access, physical distancing analysis, which I just want to pause for a minute. We are using the term physical distancing and not social distancing because we really believe this is about creating physical separation per the CDC guidance and not about social distancing as we continue to strive to build social culture and connections through technology. It also includes a guidance around protective equipment and supplies, food and beverage, visitors and deliveries, and maintenance protocols. And finally, the third category is around behaviors and messages. And what are the key messages during this time, and what alternate behaviors are they supporting? So that includes new transition protocols, in-office etiquette, and the need to continue to support ongoing blended hybrid of in-office and remote work. The roadmap follows a pretty simple 4-step process in terms of planning a safe and healthy return to the workplace. The first step is really about understanding what your new office capacity is using that 6-foot distancing guidance and understanding how many people your office can accommodate in this transition phase. The second step is really understanding how you plan your employee return, understanding that this is by and large initially a volunteer-based process, but you'll also have to accommodate the need for on-site support as well as your business and client needs. The third step, and this is a really important one, and one that many of us are spending a lot of time on right now, is establishing and communicating the new office protocols around food and beverage, visitors, deliveries, and maintenance. And really, until you have all of these steps, these first 3 steps completed, are you ready for a safe return to the office? And then in step 4, once you're back in the office, looking at how you reinforce those new behaviors and operate under new transition protocols. Of course, we can work really hard to create a safe and healthy workplace, but we know there's many things we cannot control, and the journey to that workplace has many risks as well. So our roadmap includes guidance and recommendations around the commute, around building entry, elevators, and stairs. And of course, this is a time to work with your landlord and building operations team to understand what measures and precautions they are taking around these areas as well. This may influence your decision about the right time to return to the office, and for individuals, whether or not they feel comfortable returning to the office. Which leads me to the next point. If the office is ready, are the employees ready? So the message here is really that many individuals have different reasons for why they might be ready to come back to the office or why they are not ready to come back to the office. And the important message here is really that it's okay to defer your return, and there should be no ramifications for making that decision. And many companies like ours are looking at, are creating employee surveys to gauge interest and understand how people feel about this topic. And then it might be a good idea to do this on a reoccurring basis because people feel differently over time. And of course, there'll be many operational considerations to look at as well, from protective equipment and supplies, food and beverage services, guest and deliveries, and maintenance protocols, including increased cleaning and sanitation. So let's just take a look at what that could look like in the workplace, in a typical workplace environment. And so from a workplace standpoint, what we are seeing with many of our analysis of physical distancing is we're ending up with probably around 50% occupancy in the new office environment. And you start to see some of these graphics around sort of this checkerboard pattern of every other seat. And so, we'll have limited seat capacity in the open workplace and then individual seat capacity in private offices without visitors. We are also, some people are reconfiguring seats where possible to allow for better seat orientation. And it is recommended that you do not share workspace or equipment at this time. From a food and beverage standpoint, you might consider closing some communal spaces or staggering their use. Certainly looking at providing individual package servings only, and particularly with catered events, or considering curbside pickup outside your workspace for app delivery food services. You should prohibit reusable items from home. And if you have systems within your organization that have pay points of sale, implement contactless pay systems if possible. From a collaboration standpoint, you want to look at the same 6-foot distancing rule inside your enclosed meeting spaces as well, and post new capacity limits on the doors. And of course, it's important to encourage that all meetings remain a virtual option so people working remote and in the office can all participate. Some folks are repurposing seats that are in enclosed small meeting rooms for assigned workspace to allow more people to come into the office. And remember, no matter how big your workplace is, your meeting room, no more than 10 occupants in any given room. From a support standpoint, toilet rooms are becoming a real concern for many. And so looking at the same capacity limits in toilet rooms can be tricky, but it is important to consider. I'm starting to see some sort of creative ways in communicating that to staff from a couple different locations. You might also consider designating an isolation room somewhere in case somebody does become ill until you can get them help or that they can leave your facility. And this is a time to restrict or limit non-essential visitors and deliveries and modifying protocols. Circulation is really going to require personal diligence while you move through the space. For some, where it's feasible, individuals or companies are considering circulation that is directional and marking that on the floors or on the walls. Also looking at high traffic corridors and congested areas and applying signs to signal sort of yield or wait is something that can help reinforce some of that visual reminder of that diligence. So here you can start to imagine what that new sort of temporary normal in the workplace will be for the period of this transition phase. But of course, just because you have a maximum capacity now, about 50% of your employees, doesn't mean you should bring them all back right away. It's important to look at a phased or staged process for bringing people back into the workplace, giving you the opportunity to test, evaluate, and adapt how your process and protocols are working before you reach that new normal for the rest of this transition phase. There are other ways in which you can bring more people back into the office, and we're seeing a lot of creative things around alternating days or staggered work hours that can help relieve congestion at peak hours. Also, for those of you who have unassigned seating in your workplace environment, this might be a time to consider, if possible, assigning seats, as the CDC currently recommends that employees not share desks, offices, or equipment when possible. While our roadmap does focus on the transition period and how to adapt without any major capital improvements or investments, many clients are coming to us and asking, well, what about a project that is fully designed or in construction? What do I do? What do I need to do, especially if we're going to be opening up during this phase? And then how about those projects where I'm just about to get started? What do I need to be thinking about to be more, to be ready and more resilient for a future pandemic? And so our roadmap does include some things to think about that can be simple to incorporate now and to consider in the future. And I know some of our other panelists are going to get more into this topic as they share their information.
Lisa, that's bringing us close to the end of your time, if you are able to wrap up.
Yep, this is my last slide. Thank you. It's just a reminder to continue to check these organizations as they update their recommendations and guidance, especially the CDC, who just yesterday indicated that the virus does not transmit easily through touch surfaces. So we'll be checking their guidance to see how it impacts some of the information in our roadmap, and we'll be updating accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. One question that we've already seen that I have at least one answer to, folks have been asking if they can get copies of these slides. And I know that the Perkins+Will website actually has this either this presentation or this content on it. Can you address that, Lisa?
Yes, the full roadmap is available for download on our website, and I modified it a little bit for this abbreviated version, so I certainly can make this version of it available as well. But the interactive floor plan is also available on our perspectives page on our website.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Dagmara Larson from MSR. So Dagmara, please go ahead and share your screen now, and go ahead whenever you are ready. And Dagmara, make sure to unmute yourself as well.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Perfect. Following Lisa, that's a tall order, as you all have noticed with her fabulous slides. We are, as MSR, we are very happy to be joining you here. We are a little bit of a different design firm at Perkins+Will. We have a very diverse group of clients, and our office work varies from governmental offices, nonprofits, small offices, and corporate offices that are similar to the ones that Lisa was using as her talking point. We also, as an office ourselves, just moved recently in November from our 15-year-old office to a new location downtown Minneapolis. And as part of that experience, we decided to walk the talk and actually designed healthy environment for us. And I'm going to use this as point of reference because some of the things that we've done are actually the things that we all should be looking forward to doing in this mid-pandemic stage and post-pandemic stage as we go forward. One thing for sure, I think we are all very overwhelmed by the access of information. The excess of daily updates is omnipresent, and it's difficult to know what to do. Lisa's presentation very well outlined the 4 stages that we're all facing right now, and every one of you is in a different bucket. We were assessing what to do, we're already planning what to do. We definitely should be thinking about communicating to our staff how we're moving forward. And the implementation, it's the next stage. Perhaps some of you already started that implementation stage, but this is where we're actually touching on physical space. So when we're thinking about the assessment of the physical spaces and our organization, we should think about the staff concerns, as Lisa pointed out. really, this is where it all starts. Office space is just facilitator for our company culture and operations. And it's really, this should be designed around the people who work there. The operations of our companies are the core of our worries. How are we going to go forward in this time? How firm culture is going to be affected by all of it, because it for sure will. And how are we supposed to address space needs as we're moving forward? Because we have different types of clients, we started to get different types of questions, and we tailoring our help based on what are your needs. We know that open office, that's usually just staff that we're concerned about, but some of you may have offices that are visitor forward. When you have consulting firm that was designed to bring people in, it's a different set of circumstances that you're facing. And the same with service goods. When you have shipments coming in, there's a lot of different movement that has to happen for your office. One thing for sure, doesn't matter where you're coming from, physical, psychological, and functional elements are really the ones, all three of them, that provide comfort to your staff. And as we're moving back, those are elements that we cannot forget about. I think we all focusing right now on safety, but the messaging and how we're going to psychologically impact and our staff is very important. And how our function is going to be affected as we go forward is a key to our operations. What we've done as a firm, we've approached this with holistic action plan that we developed before we move, and now we're applying it to working with our clients. It has to do with establishing baseline, verifying data, understanding the context. And what's really important is understanding the perception, because as we know, reality is not always what's being perceived. And this is a circular process. Once we had established all these measures, we actually creating a plan, and then we verifying the plan and see if it works. Because things change and need to be adjusted, just like our physical, emotional state changes in the current condition. So when we think about the planning, there are 4 buckets that were outlined really well in a previous presentation. We have building systems to worry about. That's mostly the air circulating through our spaces. Also our plumbing systems, making sure that everything functions and can be touchless. The operations, how are we going to be functioning in this new environment? How are we going to be altering furniture? Do we need that many chairs? What are we going to do with them? How are we going to deploy screens or sneeze guards, depending on your business? What is the signage? What is the messaging? And when we think about those 4 buckets, starting with the air system and your building system, one thing that we've learned from our example, and now we're helping others with, is how can we deploy smart mechanical systems. What you see here are components of the system that we installed in our office. It's a tenant space, so we couldn't change the overall air distribution system, but we could dramatically improve our own space. Typical office has 3 to 6 full cycles of fresh air replacement within an hour. We are able to go to 8 to 10 cycles in an hour with the equipment we have, which really increases fresh air. There are some energy penalties associated with that, but in a shoulder season that we have right now, this is a free energy. We also have lights that are helping with cleaning the air and filtration system, and all of it can be controlled remotely. This is one of those long-term investments that perhaps you're thinking about. We have to say that it already paid back. We took that risk a year ago. We had no idea what's going to happen. Now you're ready. Another thing is touchless environments. Lisa touched on that as well. This is an easy change, fairly easy change. Those are the products that are on the market, and they have very good price point. That's a paper towel dispenser on the left. As we think about the changes, the important thing is that the changes should be appropriate for your organization. And one thing that we know it's going to happen, it's going to affect our culture and operations. On the other hand, we're looking for silver lining. There's always something. This is a design from French designer looking at this physical distancing with social closeness. This is an idea for a restaurant. The question is what happens next in the office industry. From planning standpoint of view, this is actually floor plan of our office. We are very lucky. We have a lot of space because we designed it as a collaborative hub. You can see the blue dots, just like in Lisa's plan. That's how we're going to move back. We're ready to move back fairly quickly. We're going to wait a little longer because of the supplies of masks and other cleaning supplies that are on a back order. And we're going to be doing it based on people desire. We are equipped to work remotely, but we recognize need to gather in a space. And in this transitional time, it's going to be a soft opening. And we're going to see how it goes. The one important point is the entry. I think every office is going to be asking the question, how do you enter? How do you capture people and goods at the front end before you depart into the office? The second important point is the traffic through the office. One-way traffic out is a good thing. This is the view of our office as we imagined it. Our photos are not quite done yet. And in a blue outline, you see the impact that the front zone is going to have. You need to have a drop-off area for equipment. We're going to have a temperature measuring station and walk-off mat that picks up the debris. So the front end of the office is going to be completely transformed, and our life is going to be transformed as we know it. When we think about the planning stage, one thing is clarity in communication of all forms of communication, not only verbal communication through your Zoom calls or written information, but also information inside the space. How clearly and concisely you can translate all the guidelines in a built environment and make it feel permanent. The feeling of temporary causes anxiety in us. And we really need a little bit more calmness because we are all living with the anxiety daily.
Dagmar, we're close to the end of your time.
Great.
If you could wrap, thank you.
Yeah. So healthy workplaces. The big takeaway here, chemical-free workplaces. That doesn't change. Our fear of infection is going to bring more chemicals temporary to the office space, but we have to think about antimicrobials being one of the chemicals that are still causing harm to environment and to our health. The healthy materials with no VOCs. And the last message, closing it, people will be coming to office because they feel they need to connect with people. And the most important part is that they feel uplifted. The beauty still is part of what we need to address when we think about office environments that will support our well-being. Thank you so much. And these are a couple items to think about as you're planning. How can we create health-centric facilities? How we can inspire people as they come back, and how our culture is going to change. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Dagmara. Next, we are going to be moving to Rick Carter from LHB. And Rick, we're going to be switching to the video for you. So if you can make sure that your video and your microphone are both on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead, Rick. Thank you.
Are you able to see me as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to say that it's probably pretty obvious, and I'm sure there are a lot of architects in the audience, that the amount of sharing that has been going on through all this has just been incredible, and great thanks to AIA Minnesota for facilitating it. I'm going to talk a little bit less about what's going on now in the transition and a little bit more about the future. I like the term Dagmara used, some silver lining. So at LHB, we've been kind of looking at this as our research project, in part because of the situation we were in. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are today, where we think we'll be in 2022 and 2023. And then, because I can't help myself, I'm going to talk a little bit about carbon emissions and climate change, because I think it's a really important subject today as well. So we are about 250 people and about 50,000 square feet. Our Minneapolis office has about 85 people on one floor of about 14,000 square feet. And we were outgrowing that. We had a little space on another floor, and we were about to expand that. And now we're trying to figure out what to do next. So what we're doing now is rolling out very slowly. We have about 2 people in that office, and we've already said we're not going to have anybody going back until at least July 6th. And so while we're talking about what it looks like between July 6th and say 6, 12, 18 months from that, we're also talking about what we think it's going to look like in 2022 or 2023. So for us, we're looking at it as an opportunity, and I'm sure everybody is to some degree. We have, just like everybody else, a lot of pressure to control facility costs, even more now. We have this instant ability to work remotely quite efficiently, which is pretty amazing. And what we believe, and I think this is true for all of us too, that this is going to snap back quickly enough that we're still going to have this intense need to attract and retain high quality talent. So how can the Office of the Future address those pieces? So a little bit of terminology, we're using the term base camp to talk about this. This is a term that sort of evokes a place you come to at certain times. We're talking about choreographing the office space. So we would end up with something that's fluid and dynamic, that focuses on collaboration. And in our case, we have studios like I think most firms. In that office on the second floor of 85 people, there are probably about 7 studios that range from size from 4 to 20. Each one has a studio leader. Bruce Cornwall leads our commercial studio, and he's been really the brains behind this. I'm just kind of presenting it. We also have then a static office space called your home. So the home is now a workstation. It's a place that many times has the ability to be better in terms of being able to do focused work. So again, just the overall concept here is to establish a collaboration of like-minded designers. And we're actually pushing this a little bit further, talking about it being beyond just LHV and including other research partners, clients, or other like-minded organizations that want to share a workplace environment. And I'm guessing a couple of people cringed. I know my leadership team did when we talked about that, because it sounds like I'm going to invite another family over for dinner tonight, which is not what we're talking about. We're talking about down the road, the ability to take advantage of this new world in a more collaborative way. I'm going to go through the why section very quickly. It's probably pretty obvious. We're talking now not about just square foot per person or dollars per square foot, but really dollars per person. We see an opportunity for an actual increase in productivity, a lot of flexibility, reduced carbon footprint, which I'll talk about in a minute, and a real ability to focus on health and wellness. I think one of the things that I've been really focused on is trying to figure out the best of both worlds. How do we take advantage of those things that are really good now, those things that many that were just presented by Lisa and Dagmara that are good habits that we would like to be able to continue going forward. So just a little bit about what that looks like for us. We're talking about a future forward workplace, and it's not necessarily a lot of physical change. It's enhanced for health, productivity, and wellness. And it is choreographed by the studio leaders. So the studio leaders have flexible workplaces that have gone through this transitional phase. They're made as safe as possible. And we're bringing people back on a rotating basis. So this thing that we're calling Base Camp comes with a script. Each studio leader scripts out how they're going to use the space. We've talked about things like, because the studios, for example, might be in the office 2 mornings a week or 3 days a week and be scheduled to be working from home at other times. So in order to really increase collaboration, we've talked about things like having every day begin with some kind of meet and greet and have every day have some kind of a midday break. It kind of harkens back if anybody's been around as long as I have, to coffee breaks at 10 and 2, where all 8 people that worked at LHB went and sat around a table and drank coffee. So, so a lot of it, again, is organizational. We're at the very beginning of this process. We literally just introduced the idea to our leadership. And one thing I should say is all of our real estate, we have about 50,000 square feet. The leases are up in the next 2 to 3 years. So we were already starting to think, what are we going to do? You know, are we going to stay in the space we're in? Are we going to expand? Are we going to put offices together? So we had a general positive reaction from our leadership team. We're going to get together and talk about it a little bit further with Bruce. The next step would be to kind of charrette this idea out, mostly internally, but maybe with some external partners, and then establish a pilot on our second floor in Minneapolis that plays out over the next, probably starting in 6 months, over 18 months. And then ultimately, we would master plan something, whether it's a remodeling of that space or a new space that, that really is designed to this. A couple of other things I wanted to hit on. Again, they were talked about, but in terms of the future use of conference room and meeting rooms, we haven't had an all-staff meeting at LHB for a long time, mostly because of our size and our geographic diversity, but we did start quarterly all-staff meetings in the fall, and we've had 3. The first 2 were fantastic. We had reasonably small amounts of technical problems. We had probably 150 to 200 people show up. We did surveys, and in both cases, the main criticism was the facility. So what we tried to do was put as many people as possible in a physical space. So we had a jam-packed Commons in Minneapolis and a jam-packed Studio 4 in Duluth and a couple of other conference rooms. That was the highest criticism. Fast forward to April, we did our first remote or digital all-staff meeting. We had well over 200 people, rave reviews for the facilities because, of course, everybody was at home. So how do we figure out a way, again, to take the advantage of the best of both worlds? One other just kind of small point, I was asked at a webinar I did a week or so ago by USGBC if I thought operable windows would be making a comeback. So I've done a little bit of research. One of the panelists said that there was actually one country that was favoring office buildings that had operable windows in terms of their comeback. So we, that I know of, have designed 2 office buildings, one the Phillips Eco Enterprise Center in 1997, and one the Nordic just a couple of years ago that have operable windows. And I don't think there are very many office buildings being designed and built in the last 25 years with operable windows. So that's something I hope we say is a good idea and do more of. Finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about carbon emissions. You don't have to go far to get this research. Most of this information comes from an article in the Star Tribune a couple of days ago, but we've studied at LHB carbon emissions in Minnesota pretty rigorously for about 10 years. And we saw the most dramatic trend we've seen, and we have probably somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the state's population, is between 2008 and 2009, emissions went down pretty dramatically by about 8%. There was definitely a weather factor, but most of it was economic, and immediately went back up again in 2010. So similarly, we saw the world cut its daily carbon emissions by 17% at the peak of the pandemic shutdown, and levels are already heading back up. Scientists think we'll end up in this year at between 4 and 7% lower than 2019, which is, again, the first time that's happened in a decade. The United States actually cut its carbon emissions by 1/3 for 1 week in April. So what this does is give me hope. It gives me hope that we can do things like reduce carbon emissions and, you know, get back to work during a pandemic. What we have to do is really figure out which good habits we've established during this time. One habit I've established is whenever the wind's blowing, I go outside and fly a kite. It feels really good. So if you haven't tried it in 30 years like me, I'd suggest you go try it. And all of these things that we've talked about today, I think we have to figure out a way to continue them. So I'll stop there, give it back to Mary-Margaret, and I'll I'll be back for questions.
Great, thanks so much, Rick. Okay, next up are two industry speakers. First, we're going to be going to Christine. Christine, go ahead and share your screen whenever you're ready.
Good morning. Can you see me?
I can see you. Yes, great. Thank you.
Fantastic. Good morning, everyone. Christine Ackerman. My sleep number setting is a 60. I'm part of the HR leadership team at Sleep Number, and I lead the human resource business partners of our company. Sleep Number is a Minneapolis-based company. We're over 30 years in age, and yet we're proud to bring our entrepreneurial spirit to work each day. There are over 4,500 team members in our company, and we're vertically integrated, which means we touch and own everything from product innovation and design to manufacturing, selling, distributing, and servicing that product for 20 years. My comments today will be focused on our corporate environment, specifically our Minneapolis headquarters office that is home to nearly 750 of our team members, including 150 call center team members in high density cubes. We moved from a northwest suburb into our downtown space 2.5 years ago. We consume 3 floors of the building, which is a full block in size, and we're the largest of the 2 tenants. We moved into this headquarters and established guiding principles in doing so. And one of those principles was less me, more we space. And now in our headquarters, we're proud to have over 600 spots, flexible seats that don't need scheduling, and they're for collaborative impromptu meetings. They're offered around the building with different furniture and looks and feels of the environment. We've assigned seatings for cubes, and directors and above are in offices, and all have a sit-stand desk. And it's worth noting that in the building is standalone, and we're not attached to the Skyway system, which originally seemed to be a downer, and now these days perspectives have quite changed. Lastly, I'll recognize that when we moved to our office in Minneapolis, we introduced that moving from a northwest suburb where our team members found us to Minneapolis really introduced to commuting challenges. So in turn, we introduced a work for your day guideline or principle, which essentially is synonymous with flexibility. We want team members to choose the best location for them and their work day. And this idea it stems upon great communication with your leaders, as you can imagine. And our productivity and effectiveness in today's environment certainly is built upon the success of this work for your day principle that was introduced 2 years ago. And you cut to pandemic, where we've all been working remotely as of March 17th. We have less than 5% of our team coming into the building each day. It's never closed because we do have roles such as mechanical engineers, those team members who need to come into the building to either work with the machinery in our innovation lab or work with the robots, etc. So we have team members truly coming in each day for portions of days. But like many companies I mentioned before, we are deep into our planning and preparing of the space for a safe return. And I think it'll look quite different upon the return of the team members. In the near term, we are taking many low cost or no cost steps. And again, I mentioned before, you'll just hear a real life application here. We've established navigation direction specifically in our open floor concept spaces. We have plaza areas that you can enter and exit from many different angles, which really was awesome and now adds risk. And so we're providing element of control with traffic circulations in one direction. We'll begin with simple floor markings and signage to start with. We've adjusted capacities, as mentioned before, in conference rooms via table and chair reduction for a visible queue, but we've also changed the scheduling system so you can only schedule 3 people versus the 8 originally introduced in the building. And unfortunately, many of our conference rooms were smaller. And so now they fit 1 person, which really questions the value of that room in the near term. We've also adjusted capacities of restrooms, elevators, and the overall building by floor, yielding a new net capacity maximum that will meet this social or physical distancing requirement. And this new lower capacity, along with team member input, will help us define our phased approach. We think that it will have to modify seating and move team members around to ensure we can socially distance as we determine the counts and timing of those returns. We do have a fairly dense open floor plan, as I mentioned, in our contact center. So it's going to be tricky thinking about those team members returning. While we're working through that, the leaders are also working through, should the team remain remote? So we've got really parallel decisions and processes underway currently for that team in that space. As you can imagine, we've adjusted all the common shared amenities, coffee, water stations, things that we used to provide mugs for. Now it's going to be disposable, compostable material. We've made the decision to not open the cafeteria at the beginning based on size of team and expense, and truly wanting to really understand the risk associated. We're in deep conversations with our landlord about decisions and modifications and HVAC and ventilation needs and assessments. We're not allowing visitors to begin with. We'll take a very paced approach upon visitors and deliveries to keep us safe and really manage that scale slowly. We've enhanced protocols. We will ensure PPE is available. Masks will be required in the building, specifically walking around in common spaces and working with others. The difficulty I know we're probably all facing is some of the PPE, or I should say cleaning equipment, is just in scarce allocation. So if anyone has pallets full of sanitizer and disinfecting wipes, let me know, please. And all of these things we've prepared for are just about the space, not about the traffic concerns, commuting challenges, or the team member psyche and their change management. But that's how we've prepared thus far the space. We will have a chance to have essentially a laboratory for testing. We have a small class starting in early June in Minneapolis, and they need to be on site for 2-week training. So it's a chance for us to really test and learn, assess, adapt, and continue to improve our preparation before we introduce more team members back into our space. And then lastly, as we look towards long-term, we certainly expect, as it was mentioned before, that we'll have a different on-site and remote team member ratio in the future. It'll impact the need for larger amount of space in time, and it'll change, it'll modify our culture and our operations, certainly. What that looks like exactly is undefined. So using surveys and individual conversations to understand readiness, interest to return, availability return are all really key ingredients into these decisions. We believe our collaborative spaces, as I mentioned before, have served us well for flexibility, but certainly now I wonder if team members will feel comfortable using these open collaborative spaces. As mentioned before, these shared offices or shared workspaces are certainly not recommended by the CDC. So it offers a different challenge for us to think through, what will the future use of those collaborative spaces be? Furniture, boy, the look and the feel of our furniture, if you've ever been in our space, it's beautiful. And I think function and form will be challenged because the fabrics probably aren't the most safe antimicrobial fabrics for us to consider. So there's some work to be done there. We'll be watching emerging technologies regarding support for contact tracing and taking temperatures in an integrated fashion so we can learn what's happening in the industry. And I guess that's the word. We'll be learning and watching and taking things slowly to understand at each return phase, how can we continue to modify our space for safety, for functionality, for productivity? How do we introduce new phases and use of the space to ensure that we keep our team members safe? We may uncover that in order to do so and support longer term team member safety, more significant facility modifications may be needed to be invested in. And we'll look to communities like this and these sort of opportunities to learn and watch for future innovations to keep us and our team members and facilities safe, productive, and engaged. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Christine. And Steve Herron is our last speaker before we move to Q&A. Steve, whenever you're ready, please share your screen.
Okay. Thank you, Mary-Margaret and AIA for inviting me to be a participant on the panel today. Really wonderful things that we're hearing, and certainly appreciate giving an ownership's perspective on this. Certainly, it's been a crazy few months, something in our industry that's new every week. And, you know, there is no playbook here. And so we continue to modify our protocols as we move along. But we've used a lot of information and gathered a lot within the industry and happy to share certainly some of that with you today. I've got a slide deck here. It is really just a high-level look, kind of an overview in a short period of time here, just give you some of the perspectives on what we're thinking about, and then talking a little bit about how our experiences, or what our experiences are in markets that are now in an open state, or where the stay-at-home orders have lifted. Okay, so a little shameless plug for us. Zeller is a private real estate investment company. We're 32 years old. We've got about 10 million square feet in 9 different markets around the country, going coast to coast, although we have nothing in the Northeast or the deep Southwest. Most of our product is high-rise, located in CBD markets, within the markets. And so you'll see some of our properties here. The reentry sequencing, has certainly been on our mind a great deal since the stay-at-home orders were put into effect. Should be noted that during those stay-at-home orders, nearly all multi-tenant office buildings remained open and fully operational, albeit on a very limited physical occupancy. During the time, owners were able to continue cleaning and preparing their buildings, along with completing various HVAC projects and other projects, really to ensure a high level of operation upon the physical return of the physical tenant base. From a reentry plan perspective, the real estate community was very diligent and efficient in their development of these overall plans. If you look at plans from large third-party service providers, along with owner-operators such as Zeller, you'll find really many similarities. A lot of guidance, reference, and communication contained therein. Even considering BOEM International's reentry guide, which I think everybody should have access to and can be posted on this on AIA's site after. But in terms of that reentry guide, which I've had the pleasure of contributing to, the overall guidelines are really very similar, with nuances really related to ownership's vision or specific building requirements. So this is the first page of our plan. It's about a 12-page plan, and it goes into a host of things. We can't cover all of it today, but I highlight the part at the bottom that says, our focus is on promoting social distancing and practical, common sense solutions to present an environment that balances the needs and safety for all. So really, there's no one size that fits all, but we use that as a guiding principle as we developed all of our plans and protocols for each of our projects. So when talking with tenants and really, chatting with employees and people that come in the building regularly, the primary concern was, how do I enter the building and how do I gain access to my specific office? And so what we have done here is we've developed critical path maps for each of our properties, showing movement through the first and second floor particularly in Minneapolis, but second floors through the building. How do you get through the lobbies and in the elevators? The plan really highlights signage locations, hand sanitizer locations, line queuing for security desk, and stanchion placement for really the general flow. At this particular property, you'll see it's 401 North Michigan. This is a property in Chicago, and it has turnstiles at the entries to the elevator lobbies. And so we're using one entry in and one as an exit. And really all the flow at our properties has really been on a thought process of rules of the road. You're always to the right. So as you come out of the elevators, you stay to the right. And as you come into the elevator lobby, you stay to the right. But because of the, sort of the natural pinch point here, we've got areas where people can stand and just make sure that we're, physically distancing, socially distancing in those particular locations. Elevator and elevator access is probably the most talked about component within the buildings. There's a national elevator consulting group that developed a white paper on this, and they talked about instances where only 2 people would be allowed in an elevator to adhere to that physical distancing. Others have indicated that up to 6, depending on cab size. Again, our intent on this process was really on practical, common sense solutions, and as we put it in our communications, do not stack the cap. We're looking for people to really self-regulate in that manner, and having our team members really work with people to get them to where they need to go in a safe fashion. Thinking about the elevators, we did focus a lot on sort of high touch areas, particularly the buttons. And that was early on, that was a big point of contention as to who's touching the buttons, how often you're cleaning them. We actually sought out this product, NanoSeptic, which they're clear buttons that'll actually go over the elevator control buttons inside the elevator as well as in the elevator lobbies. And we're installing those in most buildings. There are some limitations to it, but it is a antimicrobial product. So you're actually touching that as opposed to the button itself. Really makes cleaning and wiping down much more efficient, much more effective. Another area gaining a lot of inquiry from tenants is really the amenity package. When will it be available for use? How will they function going forward? Some properties have opted for reduction of furniture where that could make logical difference. Think about the conference rooms, and I have circled them here. It's logical to reduce the number of chairs available in those conference rooms. Frankly, most locations, there's a maximum of 10 availability or 10 individuals that can meet at one time. So it makes sense there, but in lounge areas and open areas, it really begins to impact the layout and projected use of the space as you remove that furniture. Actually, we believe this is a tremendous opportunity for the tenants to more effectively utilize these common areas as a critical extension to their offices. Many buildings, whether they're newer or older, many have converted and have put in significant sums of money in these amenities. And I really think, proper laid out, properly communicated, properly set up, they can act as truly a benefit in another area, an enhancement extension to the tenant's already utilized space. Communication is key, and so on this slide we've identified we have a platform of signage that we've used throughout our properties. This is really only a sampling of what you'll see. Every building's going to be a little bit different, but most of the things about washing your hands, avoiding touching your eyes, wiping down surfaces, social distancing, things of that nature. You've heard it all before, but of course the reminders are always nice, and it's good to have that communication available as people get in and throughout the space. Let's face it, at the end of the day, there are physical limitations to all buildings where strict adherence to physical distancing is just simply not practical. We think about elevators, restrooms, even corridors can be challenging. So again, we look to adhere to that physical distancing guideline and using common sense to make their way through a particular asset. The next major area that we've encountered with our clients and our tenants is, how is cleaning going to be managed? Sadly, the work we've done over the years to incorporate green cleaning measures has to be put on hold now because those products simply aren't effective. Our teams have been engaging in enhanced cleaning of all high-touch areas, minimally 4 times per day, since the pandemic began, and using EPA-approved products, which certainly will be continued for the foreseeable future. I think, as you think about your own buildings and your own situation, I think people are going to see more of that effort during the day from day cleaners and just, more of that enhanced cleaning. And while discussed earlier about the fact that, the touch surfaces are very low, very minimal, it's also a very visible thing to give people comfort of what we're doing to best prepare our buildings to, occupy and operate within. Here we just have common area and restroom. These are just some of the areas that we're really focusing that high touch enhanced cleaning on. And of course, we'll be working with tenants thinking about, hey, what will their needs be when they come back specific to their space. Next, as we owners contemplate really the actions for reentry or re-engagement, there are a number of items that we really want the tenants to be thinking about to assist in that effort. You know, staggering employee start and end times, considering alternate days for individuals coming into the office, developing an overall phased reentry plan, designation of a COVID-19 representative within the firm to really be a primary contact for all things pandemic related. And of course, another aspect we're doing is we are helping tenants understand that when they do come back, there are things such as ice machines, water coolers, coffee machines, refrigerators that are specific to the tenant use that need to be flushed thoroughly prior to reuse to protect against potential issues with stagnant water conditions and the like. And finally, we're, you know, the communication, I talked a little bit about it before, but we are on sort of doing a road show at each of our properties through electronic means, including Zoom town hall meetings, much like the one you're on today, to really work through these re-engagement plans that we have to understand concerns and challenges of our tenants.
So Steve, just another minute or so before your time is up.
Great. So I'm on the last slide, so my timing is perfect.
Well done.
So what are we experiencing in open states right now? Minnesota, Georgia, and Colorado are technically open for business, but there's nuances to each one. You know, if you take a look at Colorado, only 50% of the people can come back to work, and there's different requirements to screening employees and how that works, and we can get into that in the Q&A session as well. But overall, what we are seeing at all of our properties, particularly in these markets, is the fact that it's been slow. Tenants are really taking a measured, strategic approach to understand, okay, what am I coming into? How will it work? How will my people get around? And frankly, you know, what amenities, even outside the building, are going to be available for food options or otherwise. All the things that you generally have available in particular a downtown environment, all those things that make it important and make it valuable. Tenants really want to understand that before they move forward. At the end of the day, you know, the real estate community as a whole continues to work closely with the tenants as we all adapt to this new normal. Again, this is really just a brief overview. I can tell you, you know, the plans that get put into place, they won't be 100% right. They'll be mostly right. And, you know, I think landlords are looking at this saying, whatever changes need to occur along the way, we can be ready and prepared to do so. So thank you, and looking forward to any questions.
Great. Okay. Thanks so much, Steve. We are ready to move on to the Q&A portion. We are eager to hear what our panelists have to say about the questions that you have posted. And a reminder that if you have additional questions, feel free to post those in the Q&A area. We have done our best to follow these as the conversation has unfolded. And while we might not be able to get to every question that's been asked, we will try to be succinct in answers and cover as many as we can before 10:30. So Anne, if we can put everybody back on the screen, and panelists, if you can all make sure that you're not muted. Anne will be turning everybody's video back on. Okay, as we turn that on, here we go. All right. So the first question I'd like to pose is actually specific to the realm of elevators and stairs. A lot of questions about accessing space. And Steve, you touched on this a little bit in terms of materials changes that were great to see. Lisa, why don't you start us off with that one, talking a little bit about the thinking that you have and your team have put into access, and in particular use of elevators and stairs.
Yeah, so some of the things that are included in our roadmap are the notion of, definitely talking with your landlord. In some buildings, if you're multi-tenant, you don't have as much control over that. But there are programs in elevators that can limit stops on floors so that you don't continue to pick people up on the way down. And then certainly, elevators that have after hours and weekend access can be turned on all day to also sort of limit the control or the amount of people using it. It's a big concern for a lot of people, especially in high-rise buildings. And if it's possible in your building for those who are able and on lower floors to be able to use the stairs to go up, that would be something to ask your landlord if that's possible at this time.
Other thoughts from any of other panelists on the questions and modifications related to elevators and stairs and other access points?
Mary-Margaret, just another kind of thinking about the long term, we've always talked about stairs being healthier than elevators, and I realize that's easier on the second floor than the fifth because I have offices on both. But I think thinking forward, having more stairs, more access to them, and making them more open is probably a design move that would be a good habit to form.
And add to it, I think that that's a good point to underline that this is a temporary condition, hopefully, even if it may last a couple of years. And permanently, we have to think about just the long-term health as well. So one thing that is important is how many chemicals are we going to bring into our environment as we're trying to resolve this. It's part of that equation.
And I would just add, I think for more of the suburban product where you have lower level buildings, you've got that ability to accomplish that. In high rises, it's more challenging because of the security issues. And frankly, I'm not sure that I want tenants walking up 10, 12, 14, 30 stories each and every time. So every time we have someone in a stairwell and we make that sort of now a path of travel, we have to make sure we've got people to follow up for cleaning it, wiping it down, and gets into some of the other issues. So I think it is a viable option in some instances. It's just on a case-by-case basis.
Good point.
Okay, another question that is perhaps a little bit more in the sort of architecture lane is recommended square footage per person. There was a question of whether there is such a recommendation. And maybe, Lisa, again, you can start with that one.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has a different starting point for their baseline square foot per person. And so there's no one recommended square foot per person. But, it's really about applying the 6-foot distancing to your floor plan. And what we are seeing in general terms is that we're getting about 50% occupancy or capacity. So, maybe in sort of easy math terms, you could double what you have currently today as a starting point, but you should measure the actual floor plan and validate that.
Other thoughts on that question?
Yeah, just thinking about it again, kind of from the long-term perspective, I think we're going to stop thinking about it in terms of just pure square foot per person. I mean, we have thought about it that way. I think I might have even mentioned our second floor was sitting at around 160, which is kind of where we've been heading for open office environments with our clients. But now, how do you do the math? I think instead of 85 people using that floor 2 or 3 years from now, it'll probably be 100 people or 120 people, and they'll be scheduled to be in at certain times. And then they have, I have the lower level of my house. So how are you even answering that question? I think it's going to become, like I mentioned before, more about dollars per person, the facility costs in dollars per person, and then maximizing the use of the space you have both at home and work, and less about a number, even though, as Lisa said, there's varying numbers. I don't think we're going to talk about it that way as much anymore.
Interesting. And Dagmara, did you have a thought on that?
Well, I would second everything that was said today. The only way to look at it as a square foot number is when you have enclosed conference room. You can kind of assume that it's 144 square feet per person because it's a 12 by 12 square. But that's not necessarily the right way to go because geometry is at play here, to Rick's and Lisa's point.
like to shift gears for a moment into sort of the health of the people who are in these spaces. We've got a couple of questions that we think kind of go together. So one is related to how those of you who are operating offices or buildings, how you're thinking you will check the health of people who are arriving, and how you'll physically set that up, but also sort of your protocols. And then related to that, if you're thinking about contact tracing for employees who become sick and sort of how that fits into your thinking. Maybe Christine, if you're game to start off with that one.
Sure. While I said there only is a small percentage of our team members in our corporate facility, we do have our manufacturing plants open, and so those have never shut down either. And so to date, we have really put the responsibility back on that team member's shoulder, and we have asked them the CDC guided questions about their health condition each and every day. Do they have symptoms, et cetera? And then we've asked them to take their own temperature. And then, and when they feel ill, have a temperature, to stay home. We've kind of relinquished for the time being any sort of attendance concerns and policies that could prevent them from actually following through on that. We don't currently practice taking temperatures on site. We've equipped every building with infrared thermometers for team members who may be feeling ill or feeling warm, and if they want to take a temperature, they can. And they are at will to leave when they are not feeling well in the workspace. We're toying with and working through scenarios about where we would take temperatures and contact trace confirmed cases, but we're not putting those into motion at this time. But we're all seeing the CDC evolve their guidelines from idea to recommend to require. So I wonder where those will end in the near future.
What are thoughts on that question?
I can take that. So I think it's individual based at this point, since there's not a clear guidelines. So every company has to decide for themselves. And as Christine mentioned, it's a mix of the approaches. As far as our office, we are actually taking a stand, and we're going to have one of the slides you saw, freestanding thermometer. It's a remote device that measures your temperature a few feet away, and then there will be a secondary station to verify that with a handheld device. And we're doing that as just a policy for anybody entering the office, because it's not just the employees, but when we think about deliveries, when we think about people who are just working in a building and have nothing to do with our business, they're going to still be interacting with our space. And therefore, what we're trying to do is to protect our employees before they enter through the door. So we actually talked with our building managers, and we're going to have the first measuring station outside the door, and then second verification station inside.
Okay.
Yeah, I would add to that, you know, as we talk about this, both at a national level and local levels, in terms of, you know, how are we receiving people into our buildings, and are we taking temperatures? Frankly, the real estate community is just not equipped or have the skill set to be able to do that. A lot of people have said, you know, that's a HIPAA violation. It might even be an ADA violation. We really think that burden really gets put onto the individual employers. So much like Dagmara said, yeah, that's a great way to address it. I can tell you, you know, from our perspective, and I think most landlords have a self-screening protocol of some sort in place. I think that's really important, and not only just for our employees. These are the building engineers and the staff that could be going into your space, but it's also our contractors, our cleaning professionals, our security professionals, and contractors in general, to be going into your space, because you're checking your people. You want to make sure that someone is checking their people before they come into your space, and so I think that's a good way to manage that process.
Okay, I'm going to shift toward ventilation questions. We've got a few of these. Boy, how to come at this one. So one way, just broadly, maybe I'll put all of these out there at once for you. So folks are wondering about ASHRAE or other guidance that will influence how spaces are designed or modifications to systems, how ventilation will impact density, And Dagmara, folks are particularly interested in the approach that you took at MSR and learning more about that. That could probably be a whole session unto itself, and maybe we should do that. But maybe if someone can start off with those broad HVAC questions, and I should note too that folks have noted concerns about Legionnaire's disease, for example, as a risk with buildings that have been shut down for a period of time. So Rick, do you want to start us off as the engineering? LHB is an architecture and engineering firm, so I know this is in your zone.
Being around engineers, just a couple of things, because I'm not an engineer, but I see, and we had a little bit of discussion when we were working to help the state on their guidance with the bars and restaurants on the use of displacement ventilation. I think it's like operable windows, one of those things that we've been using occasionally, but not often enough. So really doubling down on having ventilation that is focused on the occupant. So again, that's a whole nother thing, and that's about the extent of my ability to explain it. The other thing I would say is the most important thing I think right now is to focus on maintenance, and maybe Steve can talk about that. You know, probably in the building Steve's runs, there's a full-time team of people that are maintaining buildings, but most buildings don't have that, and we're in danger of just not having updated maintenance and changed filters. In the long run, I think we're absolutely going to see additional amounts of ventilation. You know, Dagmara mentioned the energy penalty. I think that's a small trade-off. We'll figure out a way to do that. And then again, I think we'll see a lot more operable windows. We have to crack that nut and make sure we can do it in office buildings.
Steve, want to you follow up on that?
Absolutely. You know, and spoke a little bit about it in my presentation, but you know, the buildings have been fully operational. I can't speak for every building, but virtually, you know, your downtown buildings, your larger suburban office buildings, they have been fully operational during this whole time. And that means at a minimum having a skeleton engineering crew at those buildings to go through, make sure you're maintaining the systems and operating the systems, going around to faucets, exercising valves, filling, you know, floor traps and that type of thing with water and flushing that through. That's just good normal practice on any particular building. If you have a concern, you should reach out to your management company and ask them about that. We have migrated to a purge of our buildings at night. Not only are we well within ASHRAE standards, current ASHRAE standards for the number of air changes during the daytime hours, but we've also included a building purge during the overnight hours for each building, just to again help to flush whatever air is in there and keep that moving through. I think filtration systems, we could have a long conversation about filtration systems. We're generally, you know, we've moved to a MERV 13. I think that's a number and a product or a classification that most people have heard from. But most buildings have that now, and that's a really good start to make sure that those pieces are in place.
And Dagmara, if you can give us just a little bit more information on the system that you implemented, maybe just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, well, I will try to be brief because it's, I think Steve touched on a lot of parts and pieces. I think that one thing that's going to happen as a shift is we're going to understand that health of employees is the core of everything that we're doing. So that's a big question for all of you out there when you're looking at your assets. I think that when we think about the office space, we're looking at the square footage and then the desks, but as far as mechanical system upgrades, we tend not to want to spend money on things that are not visible. So there's an opportunity to perhaps do upgrades to some of your systems. It sounds like Stephen and his properties are already doing a lot to flush out the buildings and bring fresh air. There is more that can be done with UV lights that help with all the particles that are still alive, so bacteria, and viruses, the filtration systems that can happen, and remote controls of your system, so you can respond right away when you have increase of occupant load in your building. So when you have people coming and going, I think we're going to live through more fluctuating times. I think all of us touched that people will be having a choice between working at home or in the office. So you may have different numbers of people coming in every day. So your fresh air should vary by that as well. And having an opportunity and ability to bring more fresh air to the building is a big thing. I think that ASHRAE standards followed where we've been. Some of these things will change. I think Rick's call for openable windows is one of those calls that can immediately help. I will tell you that when we were doing the remodel to our office, we looked seriously at opened windows, and the cost of them was so high we could not afford it. And it was less expensive to upgrade the system, mechanical system, to the level that can bring us fresh air. One thing about fresh air systems or filtration systems, it's not just about COVID. It's about air pollutants. It's about anything else that can happen in the future. So it's a long-term investment. And it has many parts and pieces. And as Mary-Margaret said, probably can require its own hour. So I will finish here.
Thank you so much. Okay, next question I'd like to put to Lisa, maybe to start, and then Christine, about employee surveys and how you're utilizing those in informing your protocols and informing your plans. And maybe as part of that, we're recognizing that there are folks who need to work from home for an extended period of time, whether because of childcare responsibilities or underlying health conditions, lack of access to transit or discomfort with transit. There's some great guidance from the EEOC in terms of how to ask about that in a way that doesn't violate HIPAA. But just overall, what are some of the things that you're thinking about or you're doing related to employee surveys? Maybe Lisa and then Christine.
Yeah, absolutely. We recently sent out a 5-question, very brief all-employee survey to all our studios. And it was really, and it was not an anonymous survey, but it's a survey where studio leadership could have access to that information. And it address the issue about the level of comfort and perhaps, the reasons why someone was comfortable coming back to the office or not. And we have communicated 3 phases. And so which phase were they interested in coming back? And I would say across the whole firm, and it's been pretty consistent by studio, about, between 35 and 40% of staff are either flexible to return when asked or comfortable to come in the first stage. So that was kind of interesting to find out. We are looking at how to apply that for our Minneapolis studio right now and planning that first stage. We're also issuing a survey that is anonymous, that's more research focused across our studio and for our clients, that looks at the type of work that is most effective done at home versus what's done in the office to help us understand themes about why folks would come to the office and how do we set them up to use the office for the reasons they need to come. And then finally, we're doing just one-on-one conversations with employees to better understand what those survey responses meant and to help them feel comfortable with return.
Great idea. Christine.
Yeah, I'd say my comments are quite complimentary. We are using surveys and individual conversations as well, and really wanted to take the most opportunity we can to have meaningful one-on-one dialogue with team members and really, quite frankly, listen. So we started with a survey asking similar questions, wanting to understand their readiness to return. And the impacts and the inputs to that readiness, and then ask a couple of additional questions. Is it about health conditions of family or residents of your home? Is it about childcare? Is it about transit and or all of the above or other? So to really, again, in a more of a research focused approach, as Lisa mentioned, to understand the tone and tenor of our team at large, that will help us recognize what the aggregate of the team is thinking, so we can then determine the right phases for returns. If we were to start talking about dates not really knowing the sentiment of the team, I think it would be very likely misaligned. And then we'll be walking through, again, detailed script questions so we can leverage the language of the EOC and never provide an opportunity for any perception of risk of retaliation and risk of job security by saying I'm uncomfortable. So really helping provide great scripting language around that, and then ensuring that everyone gets the same questions. There are no assumptions made to ensure that no matter what walk of life a team member comes from, their background, their education, the role they play, it does not matter. We all get the same questions, so truly we're all being treated equitably.
Great, thank you so much. We've got very little time and a bunch more questions. I'm going to try to just like have one person answer each of these and we'll get at least something in there. Physical barriers and the materials to use for those. Some of the research that we've been doing with our community is around the ability to clean a material. So that's why things are leaning toward plexiglass and acrylic. Thoughts on other materials that are maybe more eco-friendly, but also can actually be cleaned and disinfected?
Well, glass is the first material that comes to hand, and plexiglass is the replacement of glass. It has price point that is perhaps better, but if you invest in long term, it shouldn't really matter because plexiglass will need to be changed more often. So it.
Great, thank you. Okay, next one. This is our speed round. So Steve, this one's to you about sort of how landlords are dealing with the fact that folks might be asking for rent rebates, and yet you have a lot of ongoing responsibilities and costs related to maintaining properties. What is some of the thinking that's going on there?
Well, you know, thankfully it has been fairly limited, and more to the requests of businesses that are really just you know, irreparably harmed. You think about a sundry store, think about a you know, a coffee shop or a sandwich shop in your building. These are amenities that we need. They're not operating right now, and yet they have to still pay rent. And so, you know, we're not doing it in every case. There's not a blanket. It's individual case by case, and there's a pretty lengthy, robust process to go through to understand what that true need is. But I will share with the group that, you know, frankly, there's a lot of companies out there that just ask because you should ask. If you don't ask, you won't get. And so, you know, we've really pushed back hard on that to really address those concerns where tenants are having an absolute financial issue and where we might partner with them. Sometimes we can do it, sometimes we can't, but it's an involved process.
Okay, last question I'm going to put to the full group. Long term. So once there's a vaccine that is readily available, what are your thoughts about what comes next? That you know, that next phase, that longer term view. And I know some of you have spoken to that, but if you could just speak very briefly to kind of where you see things on the other side of this. And Lisa, why don't you start us off?
Sure. I think long term that we will always have this hybrid of working from home and coming to the office to connect with our colleagues. So the home office for many will just be another work setting in the toolkit and the kit of parts of our spaces.
Great, thank you. Christine.
I absolutely echo Lisa's message. I think it'll be a new day for where we work, how we work, and how I could potentially find talent if I don't have to be in a cube in Minneapolis.
Great. Rick?
Yeah, I've spoken about this mostly. I mean, I just think of all the advantages of being from home, being with your family, not having to commute, having operable windows, having great views. We have to figure out a way to allow people to maximize that advantage.
Dagmara?
I think that we're going to be less likely touching surfaces, regardless how long this will last. We will want to have touchless fixtures around us, an opportunity to open and close doors without touching them. Just that's long-term thing. And one thing to think about is the next generation, the young people getting into the marketplace. What do we have to offer to them? There will be a need for them to socialize. And even though we live online so much, the physical space and the physical being together is part of just being human. So how does that happen in the workplace will remain a question.
Great. And Steve?
Yeah, I really think the flexibility piece is come into play and will continue now going forward. As an owner, certainly I'm bullish on it. I think real estate, commercial real estate, will be a net gainer in the end, but there will be a lot of flexibility built in. I think about the younger generation. I'm in my mid 50s, and I work with a lot of folks that are far younger than me. And they have been clamoring to get back to the office because there's that critical connectivity piece. I was in the office earlier this week, and just in the short period of time, you're picking up information that you couldn't have over a call or some scheduled meeting. It just has to happen naturally. And so we're much more productive when we can collaborate like that. I do think building owners will be looking at things such as, times of operation. Right now, we're working off of an 8 to 5 and typically not Saturdays. Might it be an extended number of hours just to allow sort of that physical distancing and better utilization of a building on a expanded basis? So those are some of the things we're thinking about.
Perfect. All right, we are at time. I want to thank all of you, our speakers, for contributing to the conversation today, and all of you who asked great questions. Quickly want to very much thank our partners. Again, BOMA Greater Minneapolis, BOMA Greater St. Paul, the Duluth Area Chamber of Commerce, the Minneapolis Downtown Council, Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce, St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce, and Twin West Chamber. I hope that we can collaborate again in the future. And one last note about the other Future of Design webinars. You can go to the website listed at the bottom there to check that out. Thanks everyone for joining, and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.